Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's only daily television platform for small businesses. We bring you the right information to empower you. The SME entrepreneur, two influencers in focus tonight. First up is IndiQube, and on the other side of a break, Dream11 is in focus. Our first influencer tonight is IndiQube. As more and more people and companies are opening up to the concept of co-working spaces, it's becoming crucial for companies offering the solutions to also offer innovation, and IndiQube is doing just that, offering not just co-working but also co-living. If you're curious as to what that means, listen into this interview. I caught up with Rishi Das, the co-founder of the company. Take a listen. Thanks very much for taking the time to speak with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow.
Thank you.
And while we do speak to a lot of companies which are in the co-working space, the kind of innovation that we're seeing coming about day by day in this space is really interesting and fascinating. And you're a company that's looking at co-working and co-living and walk to work as well. But let me start by talking about IndiQube. You've been in the market for 3 years. Where did that idea for you come about?
So thank you so much. There's a little background to how we started. I'm 97 batch pass out from IIT Roorkee. I've been in the industry for 20 years. So there is another venture we have called CareerNet. And for that business, we required about 50,000 square feet space. This was in 2011. So we, instead of changing offices every 2 years, we thought we pick up a larger office space. And with that intent, we signed up a 100,000 square feet office. And 2013, we moved in there. And then when these companies came in, they said that, can I use your gym, the training room, the boardroom, or the food facilities and all of that. So when all of that happened, we realized that there is a big gap in the market. While you have tech parks and you have very fancy buildings in the city, like UB City in Bangalore and all, but if you move out of all those projects, you pretty much find that large parts of Indian real estate are unorganized. And especially for a small and a medium-sized company, it becomes very difficult. Either they're not able to afford, or these spaces are on the periphery of the city. They don't get good options. So we clearly saw that there is a need to create a mid-market office brand. And with that concept is where we said that let's formalize it and start IndiQube.
So you term yourself as a smart business working space.
Yes,
How's it perhaps different from what a co-working company does?
So co-working essentially is a term which we see that got coined in US, which essentially is to target freelancers or companies which are like 5 people, 10 people, that kind of segment. A country like India, which is still large on organized employment, like white collar temping is very limited in our country. The first thing people ask you is your name, and then they ask, where do you work?
Sure.
So job being so tightly coupled with our identity, we still see that freelancing will take a lot of time in India to come in. So that is where we see the difference, that if we are talking about like companies very small, 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, they are essentially into co-working. Otherwise, large part of companies want a managed office. They want to be sitting in their own office rather than sitting in somebody else's office.
Okay, so for SMEs who are watching this interview, and as a show that caters to SMEs, what would you like to tell our viewers about how a business like yours can be used by SMEs to achieve efficiencies when it comes to operations, managing their people, etc.? What percentage perhaps of your revenues are coming from SMEs right now? Where do you see yourself headed? And talk to us about the specific benefits for small businesses using facilities like yours.
Sure. So if you look at large part of, I will say more than, 75–80% of our customers, by the number of customers, happen to be SMEs. Sure. And these SMEs essentially are of 3 types. One type happens to be the offshore development centers, companies which are essentially funded in US or Europe or other countries, looking at setting up their technology centers in India. That's a very large chunk of companies. And the other chunk is the startups, typically, which are mostly venture funded startups.
Sure.
And these 2 segments of companies, they try to attract and retain good quality talent. So for them, employee is the hero of the story. And for a good employee retention, attraction, they need to offer a lot of amenities, which typically was a realm of very large companies. To be able to do that, they want a fully managed office. So it works very well for them. The other segment is basically companies which are homegrown companies, smaller companies, very fledgling kind of companies. For them, ease of business is very, very important. They need not just the space, they need other support also. They need the ecosystem.
Okay, fair enough. So you were talking about the fact that you look at companies which have a certain profile, which are fundraising or perhaps have already fundraised, have gone through maybe a Series A or a Series B. Why is that?
So it's not like that we look at a certain profile of companies. What we definitely, like I will give you example, the way you look at the school business, for example. There is a play school, there is a school, and there is a college.
Sure.
So typically I will say that companies which are in the pre-funding stage, they are mostly in the preschool segment, typically, and then there is a school segment. So we basically see this as a logical journey for us, where we pick up companies which are very early. They might be 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, and then handhold them till they grow. So approach is more like the way any investing community will look at it.
Okay.
Like they will like to do an angel funding and then do a Series A and beyond. So it's a journey, and we have companies at all stages of their growth pretty much with us here.
But I want to talk about the fact that, since being bootstrapped, you've now gone on to raise money from some of the largest names in the business. What's the plan now with the kind of fundraise that you've looked at?
So with fundraising happening, I think 3-4 things are happening. One, we are EBITDA positive, we are profitable. The reason we raised money was to grow faster. Typically, so one, we are expanding, like Bangalore is where we started. We pretty much now have good pan-India presence, and that is further getting scaled up. And within the 6 8 cities across India, we see that there are 45 to 50 micro markets. We want to be present in every micro market.
So let's just go back to the point that you raised as far as the hinterland of India is concerned. But I really want to talk about the opportunity for businesses and companies like yours when you're looking at Bharat. For the SMEs who are watching this interview, a large portion of who are not based in the metros, do you foresee yourself, branching out to tier 3, tier 4? Is there an opportunity there for such, for this model?
Yeah, absolutely. There is an opportunity. We are working with a large consumer electronics company now, which wants us to do about 100 offices spread over 50 cities in India. Now, we see that today when large businesses are even going to, because consumer story in India is very, very strong, these businesses want to set up their branch offices, regional offices, and they want typically one operator who could be catering to them across the country, so that they can control what kind of things are happening in their offices. Suppose they want to know after 10 in the night if there are any lady staff working in the office, or if they want to know what is their consumption on water, tea, coffee. They want to control the kind of magazines, periodicals which are coming in the office. So they want one platform. They want one bare operator which they can work with. So I think a lot of hinterland growth will happen through such companies. Sure. Then there is a need for other differentiated products. Like for example, if you look at assessments. Now today, if you want to do assessments across India in say 100 different towns or cities, I don't see that kind of infrastructure exists. So differentiated products are going to come in.
So you were saying that there is definitely an opportunity outside of the metros. Yes. For a model like yours. My question is also in terms of the role of the government. You are essentially a player as far as the logistics and the infrastructure space is concerned. What do you think maybe the government should be doing specifically with regards to co-working space? Because this is definitely an emerging industry which probably needs some sort of regulatory framework.
So I think the government has been very, very supportive of this whole initiative. I can say that the amount of schemes they have for startups typically, and the way they are encouraging is very, very forthcoming. This is a very new industry. So, and there is no definition of basically the co-working, the managed spaces as far as law is concerned. For example, there is a classification of IT. And most of the state governments, they give preference if you do any infrastructure which is related to IT. We see in Maharashtra, there is encouragement for BFSI businesses. I think very similarly, they need to recognize this as a category. Which is not the case today, because most of the people who are eventually consuming the office space, they happen to be the IT companies, the startups, the BFSI folks and all of that. So today, if you go to say, for example, Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra, and if you are a co-working provider, you are classified as a commercial business. Sure. You're not called as IT business, whereas the end use of people that we are giving space is IT. So I think that is required. Okay,
so then let me close this interview by asking you what next, what plans can you share with us?
So I think the big thing for us is can we offer office spaces for everyone, typically, and that's the key thing, and offer them good, affordable, flexible office spaces. So anything in that regard is what we are actively working on. From a plan point of view, like we are at about 1.5 million square feet, spread about 30,000 seats. Typically, we definitely see that doubling over the next 12 months itself. So growth is very, very aggressive for us, and we see that continuing in all probability. We are bringing a lot more services, like with the new maternity law coming in, creche are mandatory. So we are bringing creche. We see a lot more services, benefits which will get added over the next 12 to 24 months. Extensive use of technology. We are now putting solar panels on each of our buildings so that we generate solar power typically to feed our buildings. So how do we go green, and how do we become a lot more lean and sustainable? Sure. So I think the green is another very, very important thing so which we are working on. So these are some of the initiatives which we see, other than the scale that we will actually doing it, and all that happening in a very sustainable way, making it a lot more affordable, profitable, at the same time sustainable from an environment point of view.
Sure. Yeah. Wish you all the best for that.
Thank you.
Thank
you so much, Ananda. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's take a quick break. Our second influencer tonight is Dream11. What does the company do? Much more on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. Tonight on The Influencer is Dream11. Fantasy gaming is massive when it comes to the kind of user base that it has globally. In India, though, it's still quite nascent. But I spoke with Dream11, that's a leader when it comes to the fantasy gaming space here in India, to understand first up what we mean when we say fantasy gaming, to understand what the size of the market is, what companies that are perhaps looking to enter this space should keep in mind, as well as funding. Listen in. Harsh, thanks for taking the time to speak with us here on the Leaders of Tomorrow.
Thank you for having me.
And I must profess, I don't know the first thing about gaming or fantasy football or fantasy cricket or what changes are happening in the market. So it's great to have you break it down for us and for our viewers.
Anytime.
Let's start by talking about Dream11. And, you know, while you are an avid gamer yourself, you've managed to translate, you're an avid sports person yourself, I understand. Right. You've managed to translate your passion into your profession and into your career. So, you know, just run us through what that initial journey has been like.
You know, I've always been a sports fan and a gamer and a tech enthusiast from like school. And I think that culmination led to me being super interested in fantasy sports. When I went to the US and the UK to study for secondary education, that's when I picked up fantasy sports. A concept which was fairly nascent and unknown in India. And in 2002, I got hooked onto fantasy sports while abroad and kept playing it until I came back in 2007. And, you know, that's when the Indian Premier League launched.
Sure.
And 2008 it launched, which is when we went looking for fantasy sports. And that's something that we found missing in the Indian market.
Okay, so I want to talk about the size of the market in India, of course. While it is definitely a growing market, and I assume there's one of the biggest markets, at least for cricket here in India, compared to figures that we have seen, you know, for the US market, for instance, 60 million users as of 2017. How large is the Indian market? In
2012, when we started freemium fantasy sports in India, there was no one playing fantasy sports. The last fantasy sports industry existed when Super Selector ran in 2001 and 2, they shut down. And so we were starting from scratch. And by 2015, we had around 300,000 users playing on our platform. In Jan 2015 till today, that 300,000 users has grown 170x to 50 million users approximately, from 95% 3 years ago.
Okay.
But you know, India will still continue being majorly dominated by cricket.
Okay.
And what we assume is in the US market, 70% of all sports fans play fantasy sports. So we're assuming that at least 50% of online sports fans in India will play fantasy sports. By 2020, 2021, there'll be about 250 million fantasy sports players in India.
Okay. For those of our viewers, or even for me, who want to ask you, what is fantasy
I think maybe
gaming and sports? Yes. Let's go back to that and
Yeah.
talk about what perhaps has helped you as an entrepreneur gain the kind of following that you have in this space. You are now the largest fantasy gaming company in India. What insights can you share with our viewers?
It's not a simulation game. It's more of a prediction game where you don't really play fantasy sports per se. Okay. It's something that where you can pick players from upcoming real life matches. So like India-Australia is playing right now. For the first ODI of India-Australia, or second ODI or any ODI, sure, you'll be able to pick a team of Indians and Australians, and based on how they perform in the upcoming real life matches, you will get points in the game. And this allows you to actually say, you know what, I'm not just speculating after the game is over what they should have done. I'm actually creating a team before the game begins, saying that here's proof that I knew what I was talking about. So there's a deep amount of skill and knowledge that goes into picking your team.
Okay, so what has helped you then gain the kind of market that you have?
An approach where we just focus very strongly on what the data shows us. Okay. And so we've evolved several times. We started in 2008. We completely evolved in 2012 to a completely new freemium site. And ever since, we've been taking new features, changing things around, adapting to market requirements based on what users tell us through data.
Okay, so you were just saying that although you launched in 2008, 2-3 years into really running the business, you realized that you need to make changes. The existing model wasn't working. What helped you arrive at those insights? Did you perhaps have a good mentor who helped you through that transition period? How did you convince maybe your board members or your employees that the changes that you were looking at putting in place were for the betterment and for the growth of the company?
Started with season long. Season long meaning that you play with one team for months.
Sure.
But then we saw that people would actually churn out or stop playing because they would lose interest. So rather than focus on new ideas, we focused on what the user's DNA is. And as a DNA, our young population has low attention span, doesn't want to commit for long for anything, and wants instant gratification. And so we've been playing on what users' needs and wants are, and constantly changing our product over time.
Okay, one of the changes that you've made is also, I understand, moving away from focusing on advertisements to make it a paid model. How has that perhaps helped? What brought about that insight? And do you see a lot of your competitors maybe doing that? Is that where the market is headed, is what I'm trying to understand?
Most freemium products in the world offer free to play or free to use, and then premium. Sure. And the free is usually with advertising. But we decided to focus, even though 85% of our users have only ever played on the free version, we've stayed away from advertising just as a simple strategy to focus every pixel, every piece of our product that a free user is using. We can convince them to move to a premium version. Sure. And for the ones that are playing on the premium version, we can upsell them.
So when you're saying upselling, I understand your entry point is as low as 11 rupees, which for a market like India is something that really sells. Whereas a lot of your peers who speak to us say that in other markets, they're able to charge much higher prices than in India.
So I think that for us, we decided let's focus on India. We did a small stint where we had a product available in the US, in Australia, but what we understood was that for 10% work, we were getting 1% returns, right? So we said, let's just focus on this mammoth, untapped Indian market. Sure. And if we get that right, we should be okay.
So you're saying scale for companies like yourself. So my question then is, how much of your revenues perhaps is coming from outside of your tier 1 markets? Right. Do you have, specific models that has been designed for Bharat, to bring in the mass?
In the first few years, I think up to about 20-25 million users, tier 1 dominated our user base. And tier 2 and 3 are growing rapidly. It's also because of the inflection point of the Indian industry, the Indian internet industry, where players like Jio have come in and completely changed the affordability of data and smartphones.
Okay, so my last few questions then, and a large chunk of the revenue for sports in India comes from merchandising. What are the opportunities for merchandising in your business?
I think we're still focused on building a consumer base on playing fantasy sports of about 200 million people before we, go on to different verticals in sports.
Sure. Okay. We were talking about your initial days and how you had to, relook at your strategy in some sense. And those initial days also meant that the kind of finance and the kind of money and the funding that you were able to raise for your business was also something that you had to look at a couple of different models. Do you think that this is, true of the rest of the gaming industry in India? Have things started changing?
Gaming industry in India has been suffering from high usage but low revenues, right? But now slowly and steadily the Indian audience is getting open to paying online on gaming and spending some of their disposable income on gaming. What we found is that when you offer people an ability to put money and win money back in return, the conversion rates get multiplied by 10 times. And that's where we've seen people actually spending money, and for Dream11, a company like Dream11 or Fantasy Sports, to be truly revenue generating. And that's when the investment money does start pouring in, which you've seen with Dream11.
Okay, then my last question to you really is, what next for you?
I think that's a big question for us. And now that we've reached almost 50 million users, we're still hell-bent on getting to about 200-250 million users in India in the next 2 years. Post that, we could go into some more international expansion, but our focus is that 200 million user mark for 2 years and expanding our league partnerships. So, working with the ICC, the PKL, FIH, BBL, ISL, they've all been amazing partners for us. And to integrate fantasy sports into that sports experience in a much deeper way and convert passive sports fans to active users. That's been critical for us.
All right, and wish you all the very best for that.
Thank you, Sananda. It's great.
Okay, completely out of time. Then on this episode of Leaders of Tomorrow, if you have any feedback for us, or like either of our two, the influencers tonight, if you are keen on being featured here on the show, here's how you get in touch. leadersoftomorrow@timesgroup.com is my email ID. Reach us also on social media. Sunanda_J is my personal Twitter handle. LOT_ET Now is our official Twitter handle. Reach us on Facebook, Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now. Thanks for watching. Have a good night. As per the new tri-tariff order, you now have the power to choose and pay only for the channels you love. To keep watching Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now, call your cable or DTH operator and get the Times movies and news pack now.
The showstoppers, the jaw droppers, the movers and shakers.
These are some of the hard facts.
The power players. All the blockbusters. All the hard hitters in one power punch.
That's awesome.
Complete your TV viewing experience with the best of Hollywood entertainment and news. Get the Times Movies and News pack at just 13 rupees. Ask your cable or DTH provider now.